a lot of those emotions are tied to this sort of victim mentality. Like I'm the result of somebody else. No, if you want emotional freedom is, don't tie yourself to an end state. Don't even expect an end state.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. Today's guest was a Green Beret turned spy. He worked for every U.S. intelligence agency in relentless pursuit of threats to national security. He is the author of the book, Into the Darkness, A Journey of Love, War, and Emotional Freedom. Currently, he is a health and wellness coordinator for Essex County Sheriff's Department. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited to introduce you today to Dave Fielding. Dave, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Gina. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh my God, it's a real pleasure. I was really want to get into you and your story. And we're going to talk a bit about the book. For our listeners, I have not read it yet, but after doing a bunch of research, I am purchasing because it sounds fantastic. And I really want to talk about what goes on in the book, because listening to your story, and as our listeners know on the podcast, I will kind of mention what I've discovered about you, and then I want to kind of get into, that way we could get into the meat part. You don't need to, give the surface. I want to get into the meat because what an amazing career, Green Beret turned spy. Definitely got to talk about that. And then, your personal life was crumbling while you're also going through all this. And the one thing that I wanted to really talk about a lot from the interviews, you kept talking about mental dialogue, and you kept having this mental dialogue with yourself. And that was very relatable to someone like me, because I feel like I feel like a lot of people have it. You have this mental dialogue where you're like having these conversations with yourself. And sometimes I'm like, God, why am I having this conversation with myself? But at the same time, it's kind of necessary to face what emotionally is going on because I feel like there is the inside world that I'm living and then the outside world, right? And there's the emotions and the dialogue and all that stuff that's happening. And that dialogue is also producing emotions that, and then you have this outside world, and especially someone like you that's in these, rah, go team environments. So you have to go. And you have to also perform at your top level. You have to be, on your game. So let's first get to briefly, first of all, your Green Beret turned spy is very, very interesting. So let's talk about that avenue. And then I want to talk about the other stuff that I kind of touched base on.
Cool. Very cool. Well, again, thank you for having me on the show, for the excellent introduction. And especially for your audience, we talk about it a lot. Of my book is about the internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And not to shy away from it, but I struggled with suicide. That's really ultimately what the book is about. And I kind of breadcrumb the internal dialogue from where it started happening. But before we get into that, so Green Beret to spy. So I'm a blue collar kid from north of Boston. My father grew up telling me, there was someone down a quarter mile down the road, always training a little bit harder and a little bit longer than me. He wanted the best for me. And his father was a World War II vet. And, so my grandfather, Jack Fielding, was in the Royal Air Force. And, I'll keep it short and sweet because I've told this story a million times already. He was shot down in February 1944, was captured, evaded for about 2 weeks, was captured by the Germans. And the night of the Great Escape, he was in Stalag 3. So he was in the infirmary, and they were contemplating whether or not they were going to amputate his legs because of how bad his frostbite was from evading in German winter of 1944. He actually ended up working on the second set of tunnels at the camp and helped out as a consultant for the Steve McQueen movie, The Great Escape. So, I grew up and, this man was in my life, and he was always doing hard things. And, my father wanted me to be more like him, and, my dad, I love the man to death, but his life was very different from mine and very different from his father's. He graduated high school 1975. He likes to joke that he makes a movie, that movie Days of Confused. He makes that look like Chuck E. Cheese's or something like that, right? but I grew up doing hard things. I grew up being exposed to hard things. Wanting to yearn and be like my role model, which is my grandfather. He was always hiking up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, so I did that. I did Boy Scouts. Did a lot of hard things in Boy Scouts. So I played every sport under the sun. I was a hockey player, right? If you're from the Northeast, hockey's like football everywhere else, So, um, and also hockey. I think hockey players make the most talented operators. I'm just saying. I don't know, but so it's at a very young age doing hard things and getting exposed to the elements up in the White Mountains and being challenged and expanding that comfort zone and from athletics, having the discipline to go, right? Learning about yourself in that competitive environment. For me, I kept reaching. I decided I didn't want to go to a normal college.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was.
Tell us about that college, because when I heard you got a test from going to you got to go there for like a camp or something like that, right?
Yes.
And they're like screaming at you all the time. And you're like, is this every day? Like, I'm into it. Where I would be like, don't scream in my face.
So I decided, we did a camporee up at Norwich University, and my Boy Scout troop went to this camporee, and it was like it was the way I like to the camporee is you work together as a team, you go through all these events. And it's really funny because special forces assessment selection is there's a phase of that training that's very similar to that. And I'm leading, all these kids that are in my troop, and we're trying to get through it. We ended up getting third place. So it was pretty awesome. But so I remember the morning we woke up, they woke us up with the howitzer. And the cadets were screaming, get up, and they're pulling kids out of tents. Kids were crying. And I'm just looking around.
How old are you, by the way?
Like 15.
Okay.
And I'm like,
paint that. Okay.
And I'm like, this is awesome. I'm like, you guys do this every morning? They're like, yeah, this is every morning. And I'll just say I didn't apply to a single other school for college. I went to Norwich, and it's not a school that prides itself on its acceptance rate. It prides itself on its attrition rate. It's easy to get in, but hard as hell to graduate from, especially if you're in the Corps Cadets. And just because of the demand of the job. But what it teaches you is, it takes everything away from you. It strips the individualism from you. You learn to work as a team. Most importantly, you learn some pretty raw, unadulterated discipline. And it teaches you executive skill sets like time management, all those things. I mean, your freshman year, you're getting up at 5 a.m. formation, 5:45 PT, physical training for your audience, PT, and then rushing back, room inspection, off to chow, and then a whole day of academics. You've had a full day at 4 p.m. and then guess what? There's more military training. You're going to do it from 4 p.m. till dinner time, and then you have to deal all your homework for your classes. So it's a full plate, but you learn exceptional time management. And I'm actually really good with an iron. I can iron the crap out of my pants. And so
anytime anyone mentions ironing, sorry, me and my brother were in ROTC, and we were like the worst. Like, we were like the ones you didn't want. We showed up, but like I had like Timberlands, and like nothing was ironed, and everyone was like really ironed, right? And like everyone had to just do extra PT with me and my brother, right? Mm-hmm. And he was like, we decided to iron one day. And we just are children. We're teens, and like 13, 14. And my brother was ironing on the rug, and not an ironing board, nothing like that, like on the rug. And I remember my mom like said something that excited my brother, and my brother like, yeah, let's do it. And he got really excited, forgot the iron was in his hand, was like, yeah, let's do it, and put the iron on the rug. And then when he lifted up the iron, there's the imprint of the rug.
Oh,
and my
God.
mom was like, this is why he can't have nice things.
Yeah.
She's like, oh my God. It was like the one day we decided to iron. Like, this is what happened.
Yeah.
But I loved ROTC and stuff, but it was just, it teaches you discipline. It teaches you responsibility. What did you struggle with? Like, was there something that was like, Oh my God, that you really struggled with at college, or a lesson that you had to learn, or were you pretty much on it?
I would say on the leadership side, I was pretty much on it. You know, because
Mhm.
I had like either being captains in team sports, um, leadership in Boy Scouts.
Yeah,
Like
Eagle Scout.
thank you. Yeah, Eagle Scout, doing your Eagle project. Eagle projects like a project management, 101 type of thing,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of business skills that you can learn from doing that at a young age. What I mean, honestly, it was pre-calc, like, and I got a degree in political science, but it was like the only math available, and just crushed my soul. I mean, some of the academics like really were outside my wheelhouse. I was always good at science and social science, English,
Mhm.
stuff like that. And math was never my bag. Like it, it never was. So I definitely failed pre-calc. I think that was a humbling journey for me.
Let me ask you, because as you just said, I think I failed pre-calc. Like, how did you, or I don't know what the mental dialogue was in your mind at this point, but like for myself, like you have responsibilities, right? Where you have to get up at a certain time, you have your PT, you have like everything, your schedule is laid out, right? And then you had your time to do homework and study for a test and stuff like that, right? That's not for someone like me who like needs to sleep at least 6
Hmm.
hours a day. Like
Hmm.
I didn't do an all-nighter. That was not my
Yeah.
thing, right? So,
Hmm.
were you ever like in your mind thinking like as your NPT, like thinking about this test or thinking about like, my gosh, I have all this homework to do. Like, how do you stay present for the demand and the high, everything that you had to kind of do?
Yeah, I mean, back then it's about learning. It's creating that boundary. I think probably sophomore year was the biggest test for that because you come out of freshman year, right? Freshman year, you just got to show up and perform and lead in little situations that they give you. But like sophomore year, I was corporal cadre, so I had a fire team and I was responsible for training these cadets, and that's where I had the worst grades too. Was that
Mhm.
year, and it was dealing, putting everything else secondary because I still had to get up before them in the morning to be present for them and, kicking indoors and be like, hey, wake up, like, rise and shine, let's go. Like, I wasn't that much of a terrorist as Corporal Cadre. I'm still friends with a lot of the guys and gals that were my underclassmen. But I think like for me, it definitely, I would say it manifested in more aggression. There's only just so much you can get done. I decided to, the whole pre-calc situation happened during that year, so it was the lowest of my priorities. Junior year, I was a cadet first sergeant my junior year, and the main motivation was that I could have my own room, and it was the best year of grades I ever had. So it was like, so there was like a little more focus. I didn't have as many. I mean, I was responsible for 60 people, maybe a little bit more than that, but I had people under me to deal with all that stuff.
As a 20-year-old kid responsible for 60 people, I mean, that really teaches you something, because usually the average, I want to say, like person comes out of college and they're the assistant, right?
Yeah.
They're at the bottom.
Hmm.
Whereas, like, you're 20 and you're like leading a team. And I actually want to just briefly touch base. I think this is kind of important on the fact that you ended up not going into the service right
No.
out of college. You went a different route. And I would love for you to talk about that.
Oh, so you want to talk about one of the most difficult times
Mhm.
was I graduated '07. There was no jobs in
Mhm.
'07. It was like dry as a bone. And I'm expecting, they were like 2006, most graduates ever hired ever, since we're tracking this statistic. And I'm like, 2007 is going to be even bigger. But like, little did I know that we were at the precipice of a major financial, the Great Recession. There was a lot of negative internal dialogue, right? Because I'm like, here I am. I went to this school to separate myself from everybody else, to make myself more marketable. And I wasn't marketable, wasn't even desirable, couldn't even get my foot in the door anywhere. And I eventually landed a job in advertising, and it was mainly because my friend was the chief technology officer. And he was like, you need to hire this guy because he's got all this leadership experience. I got my foot in the door at an ad agency, and I knocked it out of the park until I got bored of it. But it was, I mean, for me, my entire life at that point, I've always hit every wicket, never really viewed myself as a failure. And it was like that whole thing of like constantly getting rejected and be like, what? I worked hard. And I mean, the reality is that, I mean, finding a job is tough. No matter how old you are or where you're at in your career, it is a very humbling journey. I was just talking to somebody the other day, like just the other day, about this exact topic, and I'm like, I know where you're at. I know exactly where you're at. And that rejection eats you alive, and you start to believe it, and you have to remove yourself. And kind of one of the things I think I did during that time to kind of stay mentally healthy was I just kept exercising. I do my runs.
Yes, you talked
stay in the
about
trail.
Yeah.
You
You
know,
use gym as
and
like a
as an outlet. But I would say probably the higher level of that now is that we have all these different buckets in our life, right? We got physical, we have social, we have emotional, we have spiritual, and we have obviously our occupational health. Well, if one of these buckets is lacking, you got the other buckets to rely on. And that's the thing. It's like you can't be too reliant on one bucket. And that was kind of what got me in the book, that I realize now. I look back and I had a lot of occupational wellness. I got a lot from my job. I had a lot of fun while doing it. And it was a good time, but I wasn't putting water in the other buckets of my life, right? And I wasn't really the job didn't really afford for me to be able to do that anyways. Just how
it was
typical.
like 80 to 100 hours a week, right?
It depends. Like on that deployment, I was doing like anywhere from 16 to 18-hour days in the
Wow.
book, and so 7 days a week. It really depends. It's personality dependent too. I'm very forward leaning. I'm like, I could sprint. I've done this before, and so you can sprint for 4 months. You can't sprint for 6 months. So that's a
Yeah.
reality. Those negative internal dialogues. We tell ourselves something that is so different from the reality of what it is, right? I love Carl Jung. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, he talks about the subconscious as the shadow, right? The shadow of the mind, where all this negative internal dialogue, this self-criticism, all this stuff comes, all that internal negative internal dialogue comes from. We're not living a balanced life to keep things in perspective.
Right.
So, and that's like in my experience, having gone out there and lived it in, some of the, I'd say 10,000 foot level, like lesson learned, especially in the book. When we talk about emotional freedom, you can't talk emotional freedom without resiliency. When you have that shadow that's there working against you, you have to give air to that.
Let's actually talk about emotional freedom, because I feel like it's such a big topic. I mean, your book it's in the title of the book, right? And
Yeah.
and as you mentioned just before, you talked about like your first time with, rejection after rejection after rejection, right? And that inner dialogue is really coming in, and you have to separate yourself, right? So um how does one work towards emotional freedom, and what exactly is your definition of emotional freedom?
I think well, the exact definition, it's not being tied to outcomes, right? Not feeling overburdened by one thing or another that happens in your life, especially bad stuff. And it kind of coincides with resilience. We talk about resilience. Being resilient is your ability to just pick yourself back up after bad things happening. It's not a genetic thing. It's experience based, right? We all learn mechanisms, coping mechanisms, attitudes, skills, and beliefs that aid in our resilience to bounce back from things. So, like when we have emotional freedom and we're having these negative internal dialogues, first off, it's recognizing it, right? This is what I say in the book. I say, own your shit. Take ownership of it. Own it, right? And when you start to own it and then verbalize it in some way, shape, or form, either through a journal or make recognition for it. But I say this, and I've said this multiple times before, and I say this in the book, be part of being a spy is you ask questions. The movies, they make it all so sexy, right? And they make it super sexy, and you're sneaking through the city, and you
You
got
know everything already, you know?
yeah, supposedly, but all that tradecraft and everything is to get you to the meeting to ask these super important questions. So I sat there and I started asking myself why. I stopped running for myself because I was at a point where I had these coping mechanisms, but nothing was working. Right? Yeah, I could keep running. I could do another ultra marathon. I could do you know whatever a successful we deem as a successful person, some of these tenets, right? Feats of strength. Feats of strength have always been there for me to remind myself how tough I am and everything else. But deep down, I still wasn't a very happy person. And I started to challenge myself and I started to ask myself why. And in peeling that onion back and the source of the negative internal dialogue, like, why was I telling myself first thing I got up in the morning that today is going to be a bad day? Or, oh man, what's going to happen today? And so for your audience, I implore you, please buy my book, is that there was a series of life events. I take you through all my spy training, but I go through a divorce while going through spy school, which I don't recommend anyone do at all, right? Like I thought, because when you're at a very demanding course like that, you don't have all those buckets I talked about to be relying on. Maybe one day a week I got out on an 8 to 10 mile run if I was lucky.
And also, that just very emotional. I said this, I think, one of the shows recently where I mentioned when it comes to your family, like you just get riled up, and your wife, ex-wife, at one point was the family, right? That you created. And then it breaks up. And that gives it way more emotion than, you breaking up with your Barbara. Like it's a totally different thing. And now you're going through something so personal while also this demanding new career that you're going for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd like to say, I don't know how the hell I did it, but I mean, when we talk about it's a lot guys like us that do the field, the work that I do, Green Berets, SEALs, Rangers, the gamut of soft operators, like it's compartmentalization, right? We compartmentalize
You guys are
all. We're like, all right, mission first. So this is the person that I need to be, and a lot of that is visualization. I always visualize worst case scenario. How am I going to react, right? But no one trains you how you're going to react when you get an email that says, "Oh, hey, I get an email from a lawyer demanding alimony and everything else," right? And it's like, oh yeah, you could be as tough as nails, but as soon as you get news like that, that's outside your control, and that's one thing. It's something you can't control.
So now take it that something like that, right? That situation right there, and then equate it to emotional freedom. Like if you have emotional freedom, right? How would one handle something like that?
Well, let me talk about the internal dialogue
Please.
that doomed me with how I framed the divorce. Was that I looked at it as the situation, what I was saying to myself when I was out. So I go out, I'd be training this job, and I'm doing a lot of driving, and I'm saying, I can't win. I can't win. Right. And I'm telling myself, I'm like, I know as soon as I get back there and I get my phone back, I'm going to have a bunch of bad news from lawyers, right? It's just more bad news. I can't win. I can't just catch a break. I did everything right. And when you talk about these sort of that particular dialogue, what sort of emotion is that? That's apathy. Apathy is very low negative emotion. And I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast, they work with somebody that says, no matter what we do, it doesn't matter, blah, 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 right? And they're emotional ticks. They're emotional ticks. No one wants to be around those people, right? But here I am. I'm having this with myself. Now, the biggest thing was the most dangerous thing is that I tied an outcome to it. I'm going to do this, and I get that this is the problem, is that I started tying outcomes to things. At this point, then it's like the same thing in special forces. I have guys that are like, hey, Dave, I want to be a Green Beret. What do I need to do? And I'm like, well, I'm just going to tell you, you ain't going to self-actualize. When you get that tab or that beret, it's not all of a sudden six-pack abs and, like everything is right in the world. No, and so I was tying an outcome to it. And then by the fact I had that outcome tied to it, there was apathy. There was my ego that was tethered to it. So I ended up getting destroyed because of it. Right. And it was one of the things, that one of the big things of terms of stress in dealing with the emotional anguish and my peace and stability in life, right? That pushed me, pushed the needle to me wanting to take my own life eventually. It was just a rack and stack of one bad thing after another.
Mm-hmm.
And it was deeply rooted in this internal dialogue of, I can't win. And so letting go of the outcome of things, right, allows us to not be emotionally tied to them. And it's much harder in practice than it is to say it, but you have to be cognizant of yourself, right? And you have to be, our egos, they're good. I mean, they do serve good for us. They get us jobs, they get us performing, right? Like I wouldn't have been able to do what I've done in my life if I didn't have a strong sense of sense of ego and being in confidence and be able to do these things. At the same time, it also didn't service me because I was just so wanting to win. And, in an end state like that, everybody loses. And that, feeling betrayed, apathy, like I can't win and I feel betrayed and I'm a victim. Need to let go of that because there's no one's a winner in this. And a lot of those emotions are tied to this sort of victim mentality. Like I'm the result of somebody else. No, and if you want emotional freedom is, don't tie yourself to an end state. Don't even expect an end state. And it's like, well, if I can't expect an end state, say for your audience, and they're like, well, I'm trying to land this huge, I'm trying to do this business deal and I'm expecting, big things. How am I not going to tie myself to this and still be expected? And because that's the thing. It's like, if we do emotionally tether ourselves to these things and they fail, then what's our mind saying? What's the shadow of the mind saying to it? It's trying to validate our insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when we don't emotionally, you're more resilient if you're not emotionally tethered to it and you say, all right, well, I'm just going to put my boots on and I'm going to get back at it and I'm going to get after the next deal if it fails. But also, if it does go through, take a second and pat yourself on the back.
Yeah.
So it's like one of those, it's very, we're not all, we're not,
I work
we're
in
not,
the film industry. I know you cannot be tied to an outcome at all. And when you are getting that outcome, like when it's like, seems like it's so close and, you nailed this and nailed this, until it's on TV or it's,
Yep.
in theaters, I've seen deals fall through. I've had deals fall through like the day of shooting, and
Oh my
it's just
God.
like, oh my God,
That's a lot of work.
and that's, you have to not be so tight. It's hard not to, especially when you're
Super hard.
creating something and then it's, yeah.
And that's why I advocate that if you want more emotional freedom, you have to, we're human beings. We can't be devoid of emotions. That's part of what makes experiencing life very great. We have joy, right? Joy is the best. Happiness, right? Happiness is kind of a fool, chasing happiness is a fool's errand, as I have learned, right? And I think you should learn that too, especially if you're younger and listen to this podcast. But what we want in life is to maximize our joy. And so we have all these different buckets in life: spiritual, emotional, social, physical, and occupational. And just like I said, we need to be equally dumping water into all these buckets. Because let's say that deal doesn't go through, you're like, whatever, tonight I'm going to go watch my kid play hockey or whatever. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
and it comes to, well, I don't want to get too far in front of us because I know towards the end of the presentation what you're going to ask, but it keeps things in perspective. It really
Mhm.
keeps things in perspective of, everything. I mean, like I was all in on that job. I was all in, and to give you, when I always knew I wanted to be special forces. I knew I always wanted to do like something CIA ish, right? I always
Mhm.
looked at that as like tip of the spear of America. Let's go, right? Carte blanche to just like wreak havoc on our enemies. And, to a certain degree, it kind of was like that, on that particular deployment with, strict legal oversight. There's a lot of legal oversight in this job. I put so much effort into it. My ego was tethered to it. I was a high performer,
Mhm.
even after this deployment, right? I continued to push the envelope while not really paying attention to all those other buckets. So there is no such thing as green. I remember, something that really stood out to me profoundly. I was a mid senior level on my special forces team, and I was planning this mission, and I had the opportunity to talk to a chief of base. A chief of base is someone fairly high up in CIA. They run operations in a particular area, and I was like, "Hey, man, how do you like being over there?" Me being curious, like, is it better than special forces? And he's like, "You know what, man? There's no such thing as green grass. I like my shade of brown. I like the way they mow it. I like the way they fertilize it. I like the way they water it." That was very profound to me. And we the grass will be green where you water it, folks. So when I talk about the buckets, green grass, all that other thing, it's about effort. And you got to put effort to the things you want if you want to enjoy the higher level of emotions that we associate with, right? That joy in life, as opposed to the negative one. So when the going gets tough, the tough do get going, but they also have other things to be relying on.
I remember in an interview I was listening to, I'm definitely going to be butchering it, so help me put this
Sure.
together. But I, it was something like you were getting deployed or you were doing some mission or something like that, like as you, I guess, took the spy job to like settle down, right? Or
Oh yeah.
something. And then it wasn't like that, right? But how do you, as you're talking about like filling those buckets, right? And also, you know, giving the attention to, especially in this high demanding job, you have people relying on you. It's lives, right? It's
Mhm.
totally, it's life or death, right? And it's very different than, when I say when I was working on a show and everyone's stressed out, I'm like, it's not life or death. Like nobody's dying right now. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Yours actually is, it's totally different. How do you, like, I don't like to use the word balance, but like, how do you feed those buckets to your personal life as well as the demanding work life, especially when you have to go?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I wasn't really good at it then. And I
Mhm.
think probably the culmination of that is I ended up where I was, wanting to take my own life, suicide ideation, almost, doing it when I had the chance. So it's I think it is a huge failure, right? In realizing that, not having balance, and chasing that high of the mission.
Mhm.
Like, and I think in the moment, right? In the moment, we deal in military is known for that is gallows humor. A lot of dark humor, a lot of
Yeah.
dark humor to deal
Mhm.
with it. I was thinking specifically, I haven't told this story yet on any podcast. I can't really give the whole details, but after the Soleimani strike, we're doing some pretty crazy things. The team out there, we're all kitted up. We're in a car. We're driving somewhere, and the gravity of this situation and what we were doing, like all of us were scared to a certain extent. And I forget what we said in the car, but we just started, like, it was just dead silent for like 20 minutes and everyone just sitting there, right? And I'm in the back seat and I got my rifle between my legs, right? And I'm just like thinking, all right, this is how I'm going to react if things go bad, blah, blah, blah. Like, and you're just doing this operator visualization, I guess you could say, right? And being prepared for the worst. And I forget, like something happened and we just started chuckling. And then it just like spiraled, right? And by the time we showed up to the objective, to do what we had to do, we were like, we were feeling all very, low negative energy, anger, like that, having that edge to just being a little bit happier. Now we're at a level of courage, and we're having a good time. We're having as good of a time as we can given the circumstances on the team, and just making it happen. Really making it happen. I think when we got back, like just making that that mission happen, that was really huge. And a lot of high fives and stuff.
As you're saying this too, my teacher said to me, Gina, I don't know this, but he said this to me. He said, there's no greater rush than when someone is shooting at you and you don't get hit. And he goes, it's just he goes, I don't care who's on your podcast I'm talking. He goes, there's a rush to what you do. There's a huge risk to what you do, right? But there's this rush. And, when I was a stand-up comic, there was a rush every night going on stage. Again, though, nobody's shooting at me, it's like, as long as I didn't bomb, wow, you get like this rush. There's like this nerve and this form of excitement. I mean, I experienced it too when I did my civilian seer, and I was like absolutely terrified of, I'm terrified of every little thing that they threw at you. The dark, just anyone touching me, like any creatures, like, all this stuff, like, no, this is not in my wheelhouse, but there's a rush to the fact that you got through it. Right.
Yeah.
But also, it's that how did you personally, like in those stressful, and I know you just mentioned like how do you take that internal dialogue of fear, right, that can paralyze you, and how do you turn it around to be able to execute? Because I remember you mentioning this one line on the podcast where you mentioned something about, I think it was like the first day of spy school or something like that, where they mentioned like what you're doing is illegal or criminal. And that to me right there, I mean, watch Locked Up Abroad, like I'm out. Like what? So I want to know, what do you do with that?
So the quote was, it was, gentlemen, what you're about to learn is a felony and capital crime in most countries. So in this business, no one gives a fuck about you. And the purpose of that is it's not about you. It's not about the individual. It's everything we do to protect the source of the information. So the human intelligence source that we're going to meet out with, that we're risking everything, but they're also risking it too. Now we have the power of the U.S. government that's going to try to get us back, depending on your status, right? So I think, for me, it's like you talk about thrill, you talk about the rush, doing the job that excited me about the job, that I'm out there on my own, right? Doing these things I've learned, doing my surveillance detection routes, doing brush pass, dead draw, all these techniques to keep the relationship secret and clandestine. And, you're getting away with something, right? And so I think there is anxiety. There is a lot of anxiety, that comes with it. And I remember I was in a car and I was going to meet a source, and I had a flat tire, and they don't train you for that, And so I'm like, holy crap, we got to change this tire really quick. Right. And because, my asset, if I don't show up, think of what's going through their mind. So I'm sitting there, anxiety, like, holy crap, clock's ticking. With it, meanwhile, we got like guns, night vision goggles in the back of the car, right? Copious amounts of cash, like, so not exactly, you don't really, a cop showing up to help you out. It's like the worst thing that could possibly happen, right? Like, oh God, right? So the anxiety's through the roof. I guess it's just, it's there. The internal dialogue's there, but it's having the presence of mind to just be like, this is something I've learned about myself that I've done as I started paying more attention to my internal dialogue. I just learned how to ski this past year, and I'm an avid skier now. I love it.
So fun. Yeah.
So fun. A little bit of danger with it, the speed, all the adrenaline.
In your head, are you always going pizza, pizza, pizza pie, pizza? That's all I do when I go down the mountain. I'm like,
oh,
pizza
really?
pie, pizza pie. It's too fast. I'm like, too fast.
I am like, I guess this tracks my personality, but I'm very much like bombing down the hill going, I got this, I got this, I got this, I got this, I got this. Right. And I think back to that moment where we had the flat tire. I didn't get down and out. Me and the other guy I was with, we didn't get down and out. We just fucking made it happen. I was like, we were like, we got this. We're going to do it. We might be a little bit late, but we're going to make this happen. Right. And, we just got to work on it. And, yeah, we did. We got through it. But like the anxiety was through the roof. But it is, and this is just something I guess that's like pretty unique to operators, is that like we're able to, in the moment, the anxiety, that's all there, and the threat of failure. But it's also, we've had so much training that we believe in ourselves, that we're gonna do it. When the going when it fails, like you had another guy on. I think he said he was a 160th guy. He's 160th guy. He said, "You fail to the level of your training."
Oh yeah, right.
And luckily, we have a shitload of training, man.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like that's the same thing in life. I mean, if you look at how I dealt with my divorce, was I emotionally equipped to deal with that? Did I have the emotional training for that?
No training.
No, didn't. Did I fell to the level of, I fell really far, what I'm saying? And it's about mindset, and it's about perspective, and, obviously tying end states. Now, obviously that mission, we had a backup plan. So worst case scenario, you fall on your PACE plan in the military. It's primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. So you always have a PACE plan, because 90% of the time, things aren't going to go smooth. Things aren't going to go how you perfectly planned it and executed it. That's why you have a PACE, PACE for everything. And I think also visualization too is a really key part of that. And so if you even when you want to deal with the ugly stuff, mm-hmm. I think one of the most powerful things I did was, after that deployment, I got back and I was just this emaciated human being, emotionally empty, right? Cortisol like jacked for months. And now all of a sudden, no stimulation. It was just me and my internal dialogues. And I get home and it's COVID, right? COVID just started. And I said to myself, I had a bottle of Balvenie there. And I said to myself, whatever the fuck this is, I'm going to get through it. Right? That's a higher, it's not a great internal dialogue, mm-hmm. but I made a contract with myself. Mm-hmm. I made a contract with myself, and I said, I'm going to get through this, whatever it is. Even though, suicide ideation, it was high. There was days where I'm just like, God damn it, I had my chance over there, right? Like, so I laugh about it now. Obviously, it's a very serious thing, but having making that contract with myself and saying that I'm going to get through it forced me to do the things I needed to do, forced me to reflect internally, about what was going on. It's very hard and this is the thing, I'll bring it back to the whole buckets, water in the buckets thing. It's mm-hmm. like, if I had watered other buckets in my life at that point, I would have been a lot more thankful for everything else I had. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, gratitude, and we'll bring it full swing, because I know what you're going to ask me next. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, what is the thing that for everybody else out there, the one thing? And it's gratitude. I was not a very gratuitous person to myself, to anybody else. right? Or to any situation and so I was always just like, all right, what's the next hilltop? What's the next, like a mountain climber in life. Okay, yeah, that's great. All right, yeah, we did this. All right, what's next? How do we go bigger? Right? Like, what's the next euphoric thing we're chasing here? How
Yeah.
do I beat my grandfather? How am I be the best fielding that's ever existed in the bloodline? You know what I mean? It's just dumb stuff, right? So these are key to who we are. But if I just practiced gratitude, I would have been a more balanced person. I would have had perspective. I would have had a perspective in life, because I wasn't able to do that. I know it sounds so simple, but when you're in like the rut, right? You're in a rut like I
Yeah.
was. It's very hard to be thankful for anything because you're so pessimistic about your circumstances. I was super pessimistic about my circumstances. I was like, we talk about apathy, the emotion of apathy, betrayal, like all these things that happened to me. It was when I started owning it that I got better, that, things got better for me, and that I didn't look at myself as a victim. I was like, it's all my fault. I took blame for it. It's all my fault because I allowed this to happen to me. So when I took ownership and gave space for those internal dialogues, that's where I started climbing out of it and started wrestling these emotions and that negative internal dialogue. When that negative thought loop started kicking up, well, Dave, what do we have? What are we grateful for? Well, it's like during COVID, I had a lot of time off. They were like, we don't know what to do. Don't come to work. I was getting a paycheck. There's something to be
Oh yeah,
thankful
I was
for.
getting a nice paycheck. I was in California. We were living really nice on that paycheck. Oh my God. Didn't want to be there, so I left, but I was collecting my money.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
But yeah, it was
Yeah.
like that's how I ended up here because I ended up joining that SEER program. And they go,
Mhm.
what? And people ask me all the time, like, what like enables someone to even want to pay to get kidnapped? And I was like, I was just bored and had a lot of money. I mean, like, that's
But
really it. That's what happened.
I guarantee you, it taught you a lot about yourself,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. When I did Team Eagle 1, Coach Max said day one of training, he was like, you don't train this hard and not find out who you are. Like you will
mhm,
quickly find out the type of person you are. Are you the type of person
mhm,
that shows up? Are you the type of person that
mhm.
quits? Are you the type of person that brings yourself down, that brings others down? I mean, you learn a lot about who you are. Are you someone that takes personal responsibility? And what I
Yep.
want to ask you, because I know you, I mean, answered with gratitude, which is fantastic. Actually, now that this is going to be airing later, but today actually I do weekly challenges on Substack based on a lot of the things that our guests say and stuff, and today's weekly challenge was gratitude for
Love
the
it.
week. So funny that you mentioned that. But I want to ask you what, and maybe you have a story where this happened, but like the tire story that you mentioned, you
Mhm.
had to change the tire, right? But like it's one thing when you're with a bunch of people, because when I'm with a bunch of people, so calm, cool, and collected. Well,
Yeah.
my family would be like, she's not, she's lying. But in my mind, I'm seeing myself that way. But if I'm by myself, like it's just kind of like my heart just naturally is beating faster. Like
Mhm.
everything is just kind of like heightened more. And I have to calm myself down to focus on changing that tire if we're
Mhm.
going to, talking about that issue. But like I find it a lot easier to remain calm with people around. Has there ever been a time where like something went wrong or you had to fall back on, I don't know if you ever got to E on a plan, but where you're by yourself and you're just like, oops, this thing went wrong. Oh, this next one wrong. Oops, this next one went wrong. And like you're just like at emergency. How do you internally and how do you stay calm as an individual?
Breathing.
Okay.
Breathing. Like breathing is the most powerful thing we have. Like everybody wants to talk about Tai Chi, meditation, yoga, all this
Mhm.
stuff. And it's all just a different form of relaxed breathing. You have sympathetic nerve state, you have parasympathetic nerve state. And sympathetic nerve state is fight, flight, or freeze. That's
Mhm.
at, when the stakes are high and things are going wrong, we're inviting that high level of cortisol to come rushing in our blood to fight, flight, or freeze, that sympathetic nerve state. So when we control our breathing, we can, hedge against that and try to get us in a parasympathetic nerve state. Probably as a human intelligence officer, some of the scariest moments, this is everybody. I don't care how experienced you are. You're going out, you're doing your surveillance detection route. When you don't spot surveillance, your internal dialogue is like, I fucking missed him, right? Like, I must have missed him. You're like, oh God, right? And you're at that decision point, and you're at that decision point. You're like, I'm going to this meeting. I'm about to go do the deed. It is very nerve wracking. It's so nerve wracking because you're by yourself. You can't ask anybody around you, But if you know what you're doing, you build a good route, you'll know. But there's always that internal dialogue, like, oh, did I miss something? Because training is incredibly humbling. People that are going after you, they do this every day, So, and you're learning when you go through it, like you're learning to do it the first time, and it's very humbling. And so you really have to take a second to breathe, and it's important that, like, I did that in my job, right? And then I go through my head and, take us a couple seconds. Now, not a couple minutes, but literally a couple seconds, because everything has to, look normal. But telling myself that I did do it right, I did everything, I executed everything. And, without a shadow of a doubt before you go in there, but it's just calming that internal dialogue. And usually I did it with some breathing, because I don't want to be showing up sweating bullets or stressed out, because if I'm stressed out, we feed on each other's emotions. The other person's going to feel that. And I'm bringing that shit into the meeting to start off with. And, it's you're the expert. You got to be calm, cool, and collective no matter what. So I guess you could say I was a pretty damn good actor so, for the most part. But in regards
did they
of it,
teach you breathing? Did you have breathing class at spy school?
No, you just kind of, like, we talked a lot about that in special forces, where we're always going out, before we do like direct action, right? So direct action, we're kicking in door, we're taking down the house. We did a lot of CQ, close quarter battle training and stuff like that. And so I remember, relying on the breathing exercises that they taught us, box breathing, to kind of like slow your heart rate down and be more focused on it. I think probably one of the scariest moments that I had were during training, where like I almost died. I almost drowned. We did a nighttime jump. So nighttime jump into the ocean when I was in Okinawa, and we did a Ram Z. So we basically packaged the Zodiacs up to kick them out the back of the bird, and they had parachutes on. And we would jump in after it and then swim to the boat, get it set up, and then swim it, and then drive it to shore. I had, like, sometimes at night, you can't see how high above the water you are. So sometimes, like, I had a couple jumps where I let out too early and I fell like 50 feet, and like they thought I burned in. But I remember this one time, or once or twice this happened to me, is that the chute, when you try to shimmy out of the chute as soon as your feet hit the water, and I got stuck. And then it's basically now a giant sail.
Oh my God.
And I'm getting dragged underwater. And I remember in the moment, I said to myself, I was like, just stay calm. We have plenty of breath. And I just grabbed the top of the rope, and I was like, can't be released assembly. And I went for the can't be released assembly. I popped the little ring, and then it stopped dragging me. And I was like, oh my God. Because I had my goggles on, and I hit the water, and it was like immediately just filling, my goggles were around my neck, and just underwater getting dragged. Not exactly a comfortable situation, but I'm not a fan of water jumps anymore, for that reason. But I got through it.
Yeah.
But it's, keeping calm and reminding yourself, at that point, like, I was like, I have plenty of air. I'm good. I can do this. But the breath is super important to keeping us calm and cool and collective, even though our physiology is telling us otherwise.
Now, do you have a specific breath that you do, or is it just like in and out? Are you a box breathe? Are you a 4-5? Are you or are you just breathe?
Box breathe, just because box breathing depends. Nasal breathing is big. Whenever I run, I only breathe through my nose, and that keeps my heart rate in zone 2, but it also, I feel almost like a trance state from running.
Right.
when I just breathe through my nose, and it keeps your heart rate low. So it's, for me, it's more managing my allostatic load in a week. I'm throwing a lot of terms here. Sorry, at the very end of this, but
love it.
we can only handle so much stress in a given week. And, when our stress levels are too high for long periods of time, we start to break down. When you're in that heightened period, I think it's allostasis. You definitely check out this research by Dr. Free. It's called operator syndrome.
Okay.
He looks at guys like me under chronic stress and kind of like the physiological response to a lot of these things. But everybody goes through stuff like this. Granted, we're in extremes, but if you don't manage that through breathing, managing your parasympathetic or sympathetic state, you're inviting a lot of negative physiological responses that add up over time.
Yeah.
It's important. And, practicing gratitude, keeping in perspective, like all the, watering the different buckets, all these things I talked about today allows you to manage that more effectively when the going gets tough in the worst case scenarios. Because if you don't, then you end up like I did, even though I was lucky because I have a lot of grit, you know what I mean? There's things that was so self-aware that I was able to take a step back and actually say, no, actually, we're not going to progress. We're not going to chase shiny. We're going to look internally inside ourselves. We're coming up on 5 years from those moments, actually, very close, 5 years from that day. And, looking at a more 10,000 foot level now back past 5 years, those are the things. More buckets, more joy.
Thanks. This was a fantastic conversation. You were really fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I really encourage everyone that's listening to get the book, and listen to other podcasts that you have going on with like your stories if you're interested in the rah-rah, those battle stories. But your book is something I highly recommend, especially if you guys are really loving this conversation. This is just the surface. The book really, really dives deep into all this, and we're going to link it to the podcast, easy for you guys to grab, and also all your contact information in case anyone wants to get in contact with you. And I just want to thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I'm really glad. And feel free to reach out to me. I'm here.
Awesome. Yeah, the pleasure was all mine for having you on the show. And for everyone that's listening, like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack subscriber. It's completely free. You get weekly challenges. You get episodes from the podcast. We get book questions, everything that you guys want to help develop grit, resilience, perseverance, all that important stuff to develop your mental fitness. So become a subscriber, and thank you guys